Hello, I'm David Mitchell. I'm a researcher who has been involved in several projects associated with the mailroom. I've been asked by the mailroom to develop resources aimed at raising awareness of three issues that affect males in our society. These being fathering, family violence, and male victims of child sexual abuse. These initiatives have been resourced through the Nelson City Council's community investment grants. This presentation is based on the understanding that most of what we know about fathering, mainly because of a lack of research and education in this area, we draw from our own personal opinion and personal experiences. This presentation overviews a range of research projects completed over the past few years and is aimed at developing a robust evidence base to guide professional practice in supporting fathers as partners in parenting. As you can see from this slide, this presentation overviews 5 individual projects. Although presented here separately, each project is linked, building upon the insights gained in the previous projects. Each project sought to surface the insights and experiences of the participants in relation to fathering. This, the first of 5 projects, involved 114 dads being surveyed, with 18 of those who took part in the original survey participating in subsequent focus groups. This process allowed the participants to explore the results of the survey in more depth in the focus groups. The demographics of the participants, age, income, ethnicity, etc., generally mirrored that of the Nelson Tasman area. Unfortunately, we were unable to attract dads under the age of 20 years, although we knew this group was represented in the region. This slide may be a little difficult to interpret without some explanation. The slide details the dad's perception of their parenting role. A is effectively the dad parenting alone. B is where the dad defines themselves as the primary caregiver. That's commonly understood as the primary caregiver. C, a regular ongoing role, effectively both parents sharing responsibility for parenting, shared parenting if you like. D is where the dad defines themselves as working outside the home with their partner as being the primary caregiver. And E, with limited access, where the dad is estranged from the family and their children for some reason. These 4 themes resulted from the large amount of data collected in the project. Awareness raising was rated the most important aspect of fathering. Here the dads talked of the enormous amount of negative stereotyping in existence regarding fathering. For example, the perspective that men are potentially a risk to their own children and children in general. This area was of great concern to the dads. Secondly, the dads identified their naivety in matters of parenting, especially with their firstborn. They identified accessible periods as being times when they were open to education and support, which would enable them to grow and more effectively participate as a parent. These times included the time before birth, during the process of birth, and the postnatal period following the birth. More importantly, perhaps, they identified that if education and support was not forthcoming during this time, they would become further distanced from their hopes of a contributing role as a parent. As the participants identified the need for positive images of dads, Mailroom developed a series of posters of local dads with their children. These images were well received by a wide range of agencies that were seeking to increase their responsiveness to fathers. As one of the findings from the first project was a lack of responsiveness of agencies to the needs of dads, the Plunket Society was approached in order to explore Plunket nurses' experiences in supporting fathers. The Plunket Society was supportive of this project. While 9 participants may seem a very small number to gain valid information, depending upon the processes followed, small numbers of participants is well recognised as an effective way of gaining credible and authentic data, especially when the participants are considered knowledgeable in the area under question, or perhaps expert. In fact, the 9 participants represented most, if not all, of the Plunket nurses in the Nelson Tasman area. The first result reflected the fact that education, both undergraduate and in service, on the specific needs of fathers is lacking, if indeed it exists at all. This led to the participants relying on their personal understandings, which in turn led, in many circumstances, to difficulties with professional-personal boundaries. This in turn led to difficulties in engaging effectively with fathers, if this occurred at all. Having said this, the participants were clear that given the position of the Royal New Zealand Plunket Society, with their presence in most family homes in New Zealand, they were in an ideal position to be an effective agency in supporting dads and new families. Given the results of the first two projects, we thought it wise to explore dads' experiences during one of the accessible periods that the participants identified in the original project. This is where they believed they were available and open to support. The particular period we looked at was the antenatal period, the time before the birth of the child. Here we held focus groups with 18 dads. As with the previous projects, there were 2 consecutive groups with the same participants, effectively answering the same question. There is a period of around 4 weeks between the groups where the participants have time to reflect on and read a summary of the first group. This has the effect of the discussion in the second group being more in depth than that in the first. In fact, our experience is that the results of the first group always change in the second. Occasionally, the results of the first group are contradicted in the second. The dads in this project were asked their experiences of antenatal education classes. In addition, the focus group summaries were reviewed by 2 antenatal educators, both midwives, for their feedback. The participants' dissatisfaction with antenatal education can be seen here. That their needs were not met is no surprise given the lack of education of professionals in supporting new dads. What was very noticeable was the contrasting views of the antenatal educators, who believed they went the extra mile in supporting dads as they were aware extra support was needed. Exploring this difference of opinion would seem urgent and vital in developing effective strategies in supporting new families. One further point was the disappointment the participants experienced in being seen as and referred to as being a support person for their partner. They were clear they saw this relationship as being one of partners in parenting. The fourth project was developed in the view that the partner's perspective on fathering was a vital part of the mix and understanding the dynamics involved. In fact, to ignore this perspective would seem very unfortunate indeed. Here the couples were separated into focus groups of males and females. The women were asked to discuss their perception of their partner's transition to first-time parenthood. The men were asked to discuss their transition to first-time fatherhood. The first group was before the birth of the child and the second following the birth of the child. The aim of this project was to compare the views of the men and of the woman. The first finding here is consistent with international literature and with the findings of the previous projects detailed in this presentation. This lack of targeted support for men and for the parents as a couple led to the second point, that of avoidable stress in the relationship. On a more positive note, they ranked the joy of fatherhood as being very high indeed. Conversely, the woman identified a range of factors not ranked as important by the men. For example, while the men discussed a lack of intimacy, they didn't rank it at all, nor any of the points on this slide. We concluded that the common perception of men's transition to parenthood is reflected in the findings from the women's group, certainly not in the findings from the men's group. This again reinforces the position that little is understood about men's experience of parenthood. The fifth and final project in this series looked at dads' experiences of separation from their families. This project was supported with funding from the New Zealand Families Commission. Here there were 12 separated dads in each group. Both Christchurch and Nelson were chosen to see if there were any regional variations in such things as support, for example. In fact, no differences were noted. The process followed here was the same as for the previous projects, involving repeated focus groups. It should be noted that one of the inclusion criteria for the project was that the dads were to have largely resolved issues to do with separation at least 6 months previously. The first finding was that the participants were mostly unprepared for separation. In fact, for one or two it was news to them, whereas their partner was quite advanced in their planning and also for amassing support for this process. Whether this is a common occurrence more generally is unknown. The second finding should be seen in the context of the research process. In the first group, the dads expressed their frustration, even anger at the separation process. This frustration or anger was very clearly expressed. In fact, several of the dads had made poor decisions during the separation process, resulting in court appearances and/or restraining orders being placed on them. However, in the second group, the grief experienced by the dads was palpable. Even after 6 months, they experienced a profound sense of loss. One observation from this finding is that if anger is an expected part of the grief process, and this anger is not recognised as grief by those in contact with the dads going through separation, any negation of the expression of grief commonly results in more and increased negative outcomes. The concept of transition helps us understand at least some of the dynamics that have been surfaced through these projects. Transition differs considerably from merely a change. Effectively, transition is a complete reconsideration of ourselves as a person. Several transitional experiences have been noted in the literature, with the most common being the transition to first-time parenthood. Most, if not all, people who have experienced first-time parenthood will talk about this as a time of redefining themselves. Further, those who are supported through a transitional experience such as this can find this a rewarding, positive and maturing process. Conversely, those who are not well supported can find themselves marginalised, isolated and silenced. It's quite apparent through these projects that, rather than dads needing to be more involved with their families, it's probably services that need to find ways of effectively engaging and supporting dads through transitional experience. One area where change needs to occur urgently is in undergraduate and in-service education. While limited, there is research-based literature available that provides a sound evidence base for integration into curricula. Experts in this area are few, but also available. Without education in the area of supporting dads, agencies that seek to support developing families will produce less than optimum results. This has the additional effect of reinforcing societal stereotypes of the disengaged dad. We need to do better. This statement was voiced by a dad in one of the focus groups. We believe it's a fitting insight into how services should proceed. If you want any further information, either as a professional working with dads or as an individual seeking support for self or family whānau members, please contact Philip at the Mailroom. Mailroom offers one-on-one and group support, as well as recommended referrals for males in areas such as separation coaching, family violence, especially supporting those served with a police safety order, sexual abuse and/or sexual addictions. There is no charge for these services. Mailroom also offers seminars, speakers, presentations, and research advice and expertise. Thank you for listening to this presentation.